Mom, can we get the strawberry milk this time? The one with the bunny on it?
Of course, sweetie, let's find it.
Mommy, can we get the strawberry milk this time? The one with the bunny on it. Of course, Hannah, grab two. I never thought a simple Tuesday evening at the local supermarket would be the day I'd stop breathing in front of my daughter. Hannah had been such a brave girl all week, and after my long shift at the clinic, I finally had enough to get her the treats she'd been asking for. She was skipping ahead of me in her little denim jacket, her ponytail bouncing as she searched the refrigerated aisle for her milk. I was reaching for a carton when the air in the aisle suddenly turned cold. That's when I saw Kevin. He wasn't supposed to be within 3 zip codes of us. The restraining order was folded in my purse, a thin piece of paper I'd treated like a shield, but as he stepped out from behind a display, I realized how flimsy it really was. He had that look in his eyes, the one that told me he'd been watching, the one that reminded me he still thought I was his property. Hannah saw him too. Her skipping stopped instantly and she backed into my legs, her small hands trembling. Ji-Yeon, his voice hissed, cutting through the store's soft background music like a jagged blade. Did you really think you could just hide from me? I tried to grab Hannah and turn the cart, my heart hammering against my ribs, but he was too fast. He lunged forward, his muscular frame in that dark hoodie blocking our only exit. Kevin, please, not here, not in front of Hannah. You think you're too good for me now, Ji-Yeon. Think you can just take my kid and play house without me. You think you've won. Before I could even scream for help, his hand was around my throat. The force slammed me back against the metal shelves, rattling the jars of sauce until they threatened to shatter. I clawed at his thick wrists, my feet dangling as he lifted me, the beige fabric of my blazer bunching under his grip. The world began to gray out at the edges. Shoppers at the end of the aisle gasped and backed away. I saw them, the people with their phones out, recording, their faces pale with a mix of horror and hesitation. Nobody moved. They never do. Then I heard the sound that broke what was left of my heart. Hannah had dropped to the linoleum floor, her knees hitting the hard ground. She clasped her tiny hands together like she was in church, her face wet with tears as she wailed, "Daddy, stop. Please, Daddy, don't hurt Mommy, please." Kevin didn't even flinch. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face, his eyes filled with a terrifying, twisted satisfaction. "You're nothing," he whispered. "You're mine until I decide you're done." I was slipping away, my lungs burning, my daughter's prayers the only thing I could hear. But then I saw him. Standing just 10 feet away was a man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a grocery store. He was tall, dressed in a sharp black suit that screamed power, and as the light hit his neck I could see the dark ink of tattoos creeping up toward his jawline. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't filming. He was just watching with a cold, controlled expression, his hands steady at his sides. If you're watching this right now, I need you to hit that like button and comment with your city and the current time. Because what happened in the next 10 seconds is going to show you exactly what happens when a monster meets a king. I need you to see how fast the world changes when a man like Min-Jae Lee decides that enough is enough. Min-Jae didn't move with the frantic energy of the crowd. He didn't shout, and he didn't hesitate. He simply began to walk toward us, his leather soles clicking against the grocery store floor with a rhythmic, predatory, steady pace. As he approached, he reached up with his right hand and began to slowly twist a heavy gold ring off his pinky finger, dropping it into his breast pocket without looking. Kevin was too consumed by his own rage to notice the shift in the air. He was still snarling at me, his fingers digging deeper into my windpipe, his face a mask of ugly triumph. "You think anyone is coming to save you, Ji-Yeon? Look at them. They're terrified of me." "He should be more worried about me," a voice intervened. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the aisle. Kevin stiffened, his head snapping toward the sound. He saw Min-Jae, who was now only 3 feet away, calmly sliding a second ring, a dark onyx band, from his finger. Min-Jae's eyes weren't on Kevin's face. They were fixed on Kevin's hand, the one currently crushing my throat. "Get lost, man," Kevin spat, though I felt his grip falter slightly. "This is family business. Walk away if you know what's good for you." Min-Jae didn't walk away. Instead, he stopped. He looked at Hannah, who was still on her knees, her little face red from crying. For a split second, the ice in his expression thawed into something resembling pity. Then he looked back at Kevin, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I don't like men who make children pray for mercy," Min-Jae said softly. He reached out, his movements so fluid they looked rehearsed, and gripped Kevin's wrist. It didn't look like he was squeezing hard, but Kevin's eyes suddenly bugged out. A choked gasp escaped my ex-husband's lips as his fingers involuntarily forced open, releasing my throat. I slumped against the shelves, gasping for air, clutching my neck as the blood rushed back to my head. "Let go of me," Kevin roared, swinging a heavy left hook toward Min-Jae's face. Min-Jae didn't flinch. He moved his head just an inch to the left, letting the fist whistle past his ear. In the same motion, he stepped into Kevin's personal space, placing a palm against Kevin's chest and sweeping his leg. It happened so fast it was a blur. One moment Kevin was a towering wall of muscle. The next, he was crashing onto the linoleum floor with a bone-jarring thud. The supermarket went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerators and Hannah's ragged sobbing. Kevin scrambled to get up, his face twisted in a mixture of embarrassment and fury. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he screamed, lunging forward like a wild animal. Min-Jae met the charge with a clinical precision that was terrifying to behold. He caught Kevin's arm, twisted it behind his back, and forced him face first into a display of canned peaches. The metal shelves groaned under the impact. Min-Jae leaned in close, his lips near Kevin's ear, his posture as composed as if he were discussing a business merger. "I know exactly who you are, Kevin Choi," Min-Jae whispered, though the silence of the store made it audible to me. "You're a man who hides behind a dark hoodie and a history of fear, but today the fear stops." He applied a small amount of pressure to Kevin's arm, and I heard a sickening pop. Kevin howled, his knees buckling. Min-Jae didn't let him fall. He kept him pinned, his tattoos visible under the fluorescent lights, the scales of a dragon winding up his neck, disappearing into his hairline. It was the mark of a world I had only seen in movies, a world of shadows and absolute consequences. "If you look at her again," Min-Jae continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "I will take more than just your pride. If you breathe near this child, I will make sure you never breathe again. Do you understand?" Kevin, the man who had haunted my dreams for years, the man who had made me feel like a flickering candle in a hurricane, nodded frantically. He was shaking. For the first time in our history, he was the one who was small. Min-Jae released him with a shove that sent him sprawling toward the exit. "Run," Min-Jae commanded. Kevin didn't look back. He scrambled to his feet and bolted through the sliding glass doors, disappearing into the parking lot. The silence that followed was heavy. The shoppers were still frozen, their phones lowered now, sensing that the man in the suit was far more dangerous than the one who had just fled. Min-Jae didn't look at them. He turned toward us. The predatory stillness vanished, replaced by a strange, somber elegance. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his rings, and slid them back onto his fingers one by one. The gold and the onyx clicked into place, the armor of a king returning to his throne. He walked over to Hannah, who was still trembling on the floor. He knelt down, heedless of his expensive trousers touching the dirty linoleum. He reached out a hand, pausing to let her see it, and then gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "It's over now, little one," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "The bad man is gone, he won't be coming back." Hannah looked at him, her large eyes searching his cold, handsome face. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a long, shaky breath and leaned toward him. Then he looked up at me. I was still leaning against the shelf, my hand over my bruised throat, my heart trying to find its rhythm. I expected him to walk away, to leave us with the mess of our lives, but he didn't. He stood up, offering me a hand. "Are you all right, Ji-Yeon?" The way he said my name, it wasn't a threat or a claim. It was a question, an acknowledgement of my personhood that Kevin had spent years trying to erase. As I took his hand, I felt the cold metal of his rings against my palm, and for the first time in my life, I felt a different kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of being destroyed. It was the terrifying, beautiful realization that my world had just been tilted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't realize I was shaking until Min-Jae reached down to pick up my purse, which had spilled its contents across the floor during the struggle. He moved with a quiet, efficient grace, gathering my keys, my lipstick, and finally, the crumpled, multi-page document that I had carried like a talisman for 6 months. He stood up and held the restraining order in his hand, his eyes scanning the legal jargon and the official court seal at the bottom. "This," he said, his voice low and steady as he tapped the paper. "This is what you've been relying on." I swallowed hard, the skin of my throat feeling tight and tender. "It's a court order. The police said if he came near us, I should just show it to him. They said the law would protect me." Min-Jae looked at the paper, then back at the sliding glass doors where Kevin had vanished into the night. Without a word, he began to fold the document, not with anger but with a dismissive finality. He didn't hand it back. Instead, he tucked it into the side pocket of my bag as he handed the purse to me. "A piece of paper only works on men who respect the ink," Min-Jae said, stepping closer. His presence was overwhelming, a mixture of expensive cologne and the cold scent of the winter air he'd brought in with him. Kevin Choi does not respect the law. He only respects what he fears. And right now, the only thing he fears is the police arriving 10 minutes too late to save you. Hana was still clinging to my leg, her face buried in the beige fabric of my blazer. I reached down to stroke her hair, my fingers still trembling. Around us, the supermarket was beginning to breathe again. A manager was finally approaching, hovering a safe distance away with a walkie-talkie, and a few onlookers were whispering, their eyes darting between the broken display of peaches and the man in the black suit. Min-Jae ignored them all. His focus was an absolute, unwavering beam directed solely at us. "The system gave you a shield made of wood to fight a man with a hammer, Ji-Yeon. It's designed to process your tragedy after it happens, not to prevent it." I didn't know what else to do, I whispered, the reality of my helplessness crashing down on me. "I followed every rule, I went to every hearing, I did everything the judge told me to do." "I know you did," he replied, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something human behind the steel of his gaze, a flash of recognition or perhaps a memory of his own. "But rules are for people who play by them. Men like Kevin, they see your compliance as a weakness. They see that paper as a dare." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small, heavy card. It wasn't white or flimsy like a standard business card. It was matte black, made of a thick, textured material with only a single name and a phone number embossed in silver. No company name, no title, just Min-Jae Lee. He held it out to me. When I took it, the weight of the card felt significant, almost like a weapon in its own right. "The law failed you tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a tone that felt like a private vow. "It failed you every time he raised his hand in your home, and it failed you the moment he stepped into this store. I am telling you now, that ends. From this moment on, you don't call the station and wait for a siren. You call this number." I looked down at the card, then up at the dragon ink curling around his neck. I knew what people said about men like him. My cousins had whispered about the boss who ran the logistics at the docks, the man who settled debts that the courts couldn't touch. My mother had warned me to never catch the eye of someone whose power didn't come from a ballot box. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this for us? You don't even know me." Min-Jae looked at Hana, who had finally looked up, her tear-stained face curious and wary. He didn't smile. I suspected he wasn't a man who smiled often, but his expression softened just enough to settle the air. "Because I know what it's like to realize too late that a piece of paper can't stop a bullet or a fist," he said. The words were heavy with a grief he didn't explain. "I have spent my life building an authority that doesn't require a judge's signature. If you want to be safe, truly safe, you have to stop asking the world for permission to survive. You have to take it." The store manager finally reached us, babbling about calling the authorities and filing an incident report. Min-Jae didn't even turn his head. He merely held up a hand, and the manager stopped mid-sentence, silenced by a level of authority that no retail training could prepare him for. "Go home, Ji-Yeon," Min-Jae said, his eyes locking onto mine one last time. "Bathe your daughter, lock your door, and put that card by your bed. Tomorrow the world will try to tell you that what happened here was just a violation of a stay-away order. But you and I know it was an attempted murder." He leaned in slightly, and I caught the glint of the rings back on his fingers. "The law will offer you a process. I am offering you a result. Decide which one you want." Without waiting for an answer, He turned and walked toward the exit. He didn't look back to see if I was following. He didn't look at the cameras or the crowd. He simply walked out into the night, a shadow returning to the shadows, leaving me standing in the middle of the grocery aisle with a useless restraining order in my bag and a black card in my hand that felt like the beginning of a very different kind of life. The following morning, the kitchen in my mother's house smelled of ginger and steamed rice, but the usual comfort of the scent felt thin, unable to mask the clinical smell of the antiseptic I'd used on my neck. I wore a high-collared sweater to hide the fingerprint bruises Kevin had left behind, but I couldn't hide the black card sitting on the wooden table between us. It looked like a dark void against the floral tablecloth. My mother, Ji-Yeon, didn't touch it. She stared at it while she poured tea, her movements stiff and uncharacteristically silent. Beside her, my older cousin Jun-ho leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed as he studied the embossed silver name. Jun-ho worked at the shipping yards. He was a man who heard the heartbeat of the city long before it reached the local news. "Where did you get this, Ji-Yeon?" Jun-ho asked, his voice dropping into a register I'd never heard before. It wasn't the protective tone of an older brother. It was the hushed whisper of a man discussing a ghost. "He was at the supermarket," I said, my voice still sounding like it was scraping against sandpaper. "He stopped Kevin. He saved me, Jun-ho, if it weren't for him." "Do you have any idea whose hand you held?" Jun-ho interrupted, finally leaning forward to tap the card. "This isn't just a businessman. In the soul-based circles here, they don't call him Min-Jae Lee. They call him the silent architect. He is the shadow behind the largest logistics firms in the state, but that's just the face he shows the tax man." My mother set the teapot down with a heavy clatter. "Ji-Yeon, listen to your cousin. There are stories about that man's family. They say the Lee lineage goes back to the old districts in Incheon. They say they don't use guns because they don't need to, that they own the streets, the docks, and the men who walk them. He is Korean Mafia." "He was kind to Hana," I countered, though a cold shiver traced the line of my spine. I remembered the way his rings had felt, cold, hard, and expensive. I remembered the dragon ink climbing his throat. He knelt on the floor for her. He told her she didn't have to pray for mercy anymore. "That's how they find their way in," my mother whispered, clutching her prayer beads. "They find a person with a hole in their life and they fill it with gold and iron. But that protection comes with a price." "You think Kevin is dangerous? Kevin is a dog with a loud bark. Min-Jae Lee is a storm. You don't ask a storm for a favor and expect to stay dry." Jun-ho nodded, his expression grim. "I've seen his men at the docks, Ji-Yeon. They don't talk, they don't bicker, and they never move without his word. A few years ago, a rival crew tried to move in on his territory. They didn't go to jail. They didn't end up in the hospital. They just vanished. The police didn't even file a report. That's the kind of underground we're talking about. The law doesn't touch him because he is the law in the places the sun doesn't reach." I looked down at the matte black card. I thought about the piece of paper currently sitting in my trash can, the restraining order that Kevin had laughed at. I thought about the terror of the supermarket aisle, the feeling of my life being squeezed out of me while strangers filmed it on their phones. "The law already failed me," I said, my voice gaining a sudden sharp edge. "Kevin violated that order 5 times in 6 months. The police told me to keep a log. They told me to be vigilant. Vigilance doesn't stop a man from crushing your windpipe in front of your daughter. So you'd rather owe a debt to a monster?" Jun-ho asked. "He didn't act like a monster," I whispered. "He acted like a man who was tired of seeing people get hurt." "That's the most dangerous part about him," Jun-ho replied. "He makes you believe he's the hero of the story. But men like that, they live by a different code, Ji-Yeon, if you call that number. You're stepping out of the light. You're entering a world where debts are paid in blood and loyalty is the only currency." The room fell silent as Hana wandered in, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She walked straight to the table and pointed at the black card. "Is that the nice man's paper?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "The man who made the bad man go away." My mother and Jun-ho exchanged a look of pure heartbreak. To them, Min-Jae Lee was a myth of violence and corruption, a ghost story told to keep people in line. But to Hana, He was the only person in her short, terrified life who had actually made the world stop hurting. I picked up the card. It felt heavy, cold, and strangely grounding. I knew my family was right to be afraid. I knew that underground networks meant things I didn't want to understand: smuggling, intimidation, and the kind of power that lived outside the lines of morality. But I also knew the feeling of Kevin's hands on my throat. I knew the sound of my daughter's screams. "I'm not looking for a hero," I told them, tucking the card into the pocket of my sweater right against my heart. "I'm looking for a wall, and for the first time in 3 years I think I found one." As I walked Hannah back to her room, I could feel their eyes on me, a mixture of pity and fear. They thought I was walking into a lion's den. They didn't realize that when you've been hunted by a wolf for years, the lion doesn't look like a predator. He looks like sanctuary. The following week, the matte black card felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. Every time a car slowed down too quickly near the sidewalk or a floorboard creaked in the night, my hand would find its way to that heavy card. I finally called the number on a Thursday afternoon. I expected a gruff underling or a cold, automated voice. Instead, Min-Jae answered on the second ring. His voice was like low-frequency thunder, calm, resonant, and entirely focused. He didn't ask why I called. He simply said, "You and Hannah should eat. I'll send a car at 7. The car that arrived was a silent, obsidian-colored sedan with windows so dark they looked like polished stone. As we pulled up to a small, nondescript restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, there were no neon signs or flashy advertisements. Only a small wooden plaque by the door. Inside, the air was thick with the savory, caramelized scent of toasted sesame oil and marinated beef. Min-Jae was already there, seated at a private corner table with a built-in charcoal grill. He had shed his suit jacket, revealing a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing the intricate black ink that flowed down his forearms, waves and dragon scales that seemed to move in the dim light. He stood as we approached, his presence filling the small alcove. "Ji-Yeon, Hannah," he said, acknowledging us with a slight, respectful bow. Hannah stayed close to my side, her fingers twisting the hem of my sweater, but her nose was already twitching at the smell of the food. Min-Jae noticed. He didn't try to force a conversation. He simply gestured to the cushioned benches. "They have the best galbi in the city. I thought Hannah might like the sweetness." As the plates of marbled short ribs and colorful banchan filled the table, the tension in my shoulders began to ebb away. Min-Jae picked up a pair of long silver tongs, but then he paused, looking at Hannah. "Do you know the secret to the perfect bite?" he asked her, his voice softening. Hannah shook her head slowly, her eyes wide. "It's the patience," he said. He placed a strip of beef on the sizzling grate. "SSSSHHH. You have to wait for the edges to curl just a little. If you flip it too soon, the flavor stays hidden. If you wait too long, it turns to charcoal. Everything in life is about the timing." He handed the tongs to Hannah, his large, tattooed hand hovering just inches from hers to steady them. I held my breath, waiting for her to shrink back, but she didn't. Under his quiet guidance, she helped him flip the meat. He showed her how to use a lettuce leaf as a cradle, how to add a dab of samjang and a slice of pickled radish. "There," he said, watching as she took a bite. "Now you're a professional." Hannah beamed, a genuine, toothy smile that I hadn't seen since before Kevin broke back into our lives. "It's good, Uncle Min," the name caught in the air. I froze, worried the familiarity might offend a man of his stature, but Min-Jae just looked at her, something profound and unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. He didn't correct her. Instead, he reached out and adjusted the small fan above the grill so the smoke wouldn't drift toward her face. "You have a natural talent, Hannah," he said quietly. Throughout the meal, he didn't talk about the supermarket or the underground world my cousin had warned me about. Instead, he asked about Hannah's school and my work at the clinic. He spoke about the history of the neighborhood, his words weaving a sense of stability around us that felt more solid than any brick wall. "People think power is about making noise," he said, turning a piece of garlic on the grill as he looked at me. "But true power is the ability to create a space where the people you care about don't have to look over their shoulders. That is the only thing worth building." I watched him, the way he carefully cut the meat into small, manageable pieces for Hannah, the way he moved with a controlled strength that suggested he could just as easily crush a man's hand as he could tend to a child's dinner. He was a dragon, exactly as the rumors said, but sitting here in the warm glow of the charcoal, he wasn't the monster from my mother's stories. He was a guardian. As the meal wound down, Hana's head began to bob with exhaustion, the safety of the environment finally allowing her guard to drop completely. She eventually slumped against his arm, her small hand resting near the dragon tattoo on his wrist. Min-Jae didn't move. He sat perfectly still, allowing her to use him as a pillar of support, his expression one of somber, quiet duty. "She trusts you," I whispered, looking at the two of them. "Children know when someone is a predator and when someone is a protector," Min-Jae replied, his gaze meeting mine. "I made a promise to her in that aisle, Ji-Yeon. I don't break promises." When we left the restaurant, the cool night air felt different. It didn't feel threatening anymore, it felt like a beginning. As the driver opened the door for us, Hana turned and waved. "Bye-bye, Uncle Min." Min-Jae stood under the dim street lamp, his silhouette sharp and imposing against the city skyline. He gave a single, firm nod. As the car pulled away, I looked back and saw him still standing there, a lone sentry in the dark. I realized then that while my family was right to fear the world he came from, they were wrong about one thing: the price of his protection wasn't a burden. It was the first time I had felt truly light in years. I looked down at Hana, already fast asleep, and then at the matte black card in my purse. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was being looked after by the most dangerous man in the city, and for the first time, I slept without checking the locks twice. After dinner, the obsidian sedan didn't take us straight home. Instead, it glided up the winding roads of the hills, eventually pulling into the circular driveway of a sprawling estate that overlooked the city's glittering grid. Min-Jae stepped out and opened the door, his movement still carrying that effortless, lethal grace. Hana was asleep, her head lolling against my shoulder, and as I moved to shift her, Min-Jae reached in. He lifted her with a tenderness that seemed at odds with his towering frame, her small denim jacket bunching against his white dress shirt. He carried her inside to a guest suite that smelled of fresh linen and cedar, laying her down on a bed larger than our entire living room. I watched him from the doorway, the way he lingered for a second to ensure she was settled, his silhouette a sharp contrast against the soft lamplight. When he stepped back out into the hallway, he gestured toward a wide balcony that faced the city. We stood there in the silence of the high altitude, the wind whipping at the edges of his collar. For the first time, the silent architect looked less like a king on a throne and more like a man standing in a graveyard of his own making. "You have a beautiful home, Min-Jae," I said, leaning against the cold stone railing. "It's like an empire up here." Min-Jae stared out at the lights below, his hands gripped tight on the railing. "An empire of glass and echoes, Ji-Yeon. People in this city fear me because of what I have. They respect me because of what I can do to them. But standing here looking at these rooms, most nights it just feels like a very expensive cage." I looked at him, surprised by the sudden vulnerability in his voice. "My family told me stories. They said you have everything anyone could ever want." "I have resources," he corrected, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly hum. "I have men who will move mountains on my command. I have the ability to change the fate of a business or the life of an enemy with a single phone call. But for a long time that power meant nothing." He turned to face me, the moonlight catching the dark ink of the dragon on his neck. 5 years ago I had a wife, Yoon-hee, and a daughter, Ji-Yeon. She would have been just a few years older than Hana is now. The air between us seemed to thicken. I didn't say anything, I didn't have to. The grief radiating from him was a physical weight. "In my world there are rules," he continued, his eyes hardening. "But not everyone follows them. A rival family, men who didn't care about the codes of the underground, decided that the best way to break me was to take what I loved. I was powerful, I was wealthy, I had 100 men under my thumb. And yet I couldn't stop a car bomb from taking them both while I was in a board meeting 10 miles away." He looked down at his hands, the gold and onyx rings glinting. "I spent the next 3 years dismantling every person involved. I used every ounce of my empire to ensure they ceased to exist. And when the dust settled, I realized I was standing in the middle of a kingdom with no heirs. I had all this authority, all this strength, and absolutely no one left to protect. He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence cutting through the chilly mountain air. When I saw you in that supermarket aisle, Ji-Yeon, I didn't just see a woman in trouble. I saw a moment I had missed 5 years ago. I saw a chance to finally use this weight I carry for something other than revenge. I reached out, my fingers tentatively brushing the sleeve of his shirt. You don't owe us anything, Min-Jae. You already saved us. You don't understand, he said, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. For 5 years I have been a ghost in a suit. I built this empire out of habit, out of spite. But watching Hana flip that meat on the grill tonight, hearing her call me uncle, it was the first time this house didn't feel like a tomb. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw just above the fatting bruises Kevin had left. His touch was electric, a mixture of rough skin and absolute gentleness. I told you the law failed you, and it did, but I am failing myself if I let this power go to waste again. I have an empire, Ji-Yeon, and for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I finally have a reason to defend the gates. In that moment, the rumors of the mafia boss and the silent architect faded away. He wasn't the monster my mother feared, and he wasn't just the man who removed his rings to fight. He was someone who understood that the greatest tragedy isn't losing power, it's having it and having no one to hold it for. We aren't a project, Min-Jae, I whispered. We're just people. I know, he replied, his hand lingering on my face. That's why you're the only thing in this city that actually matters. As we stood there overlooking the world, I realized that the debt my cousin warned me about wasn't one of money or blood. It was a debt of the heart. Min-Jae Lee had given us his protection, but in the quiet of his empty empire, we had given him something he thought was gone forever, a purpose. The peace we had found in Min-Jae's presence felt like a fragile glass sculpture, beautiful, clear, but prone to shattering at the slightest vibration. For 3 weeks, the world had been quiet. Kevin was in custody awaiting his preliminary hearing, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up with my heart racing. But the thing about men like Kevin is that they don't know how to exist without causing pain. They view silence not as peace, but as an opportunity. I was sitting in the break room of the clinic sipping lukewarm coffee when my phone buzzed on the laminate table. It was a message from an unknown number. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip before I even opened it. The image loaded pixel by pixel, a jagged spear of ice piercing through my chest. It was a photo of Hana. She was standing at the edge of the school playground, her denim jacket bright against the gray pavement. She was laughing, her hair messy from playing tag, completely unaware of the person standing just a few feet away, hidden behind a chain-link fence, capturing her image. The text beneath it read, "You think you're safe because of your new boyfriend. No one can keep me away from my daughter. I see everything." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped breathing, the same way I had in the supermarket aisle. Kevin was behind bars, but his reach, facilitated by his mother or some desperate friend, was still long enough to touch the only thing that mattered to me. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my mother. I picked up the matte black card from my wallet and dialed the number that had become my lifeline. "Min-Jae," I whispered as soon as he picked up. "He sent a photo. He's at her school. Someone is watching her right now." The silence on the other end was more terrifying than any shout. It was a cold, vacuum-sealed void. "Stay where you are, Ji-Yeon," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth. "I am already moving." By the time I reached Hana's school, 2 obsidian-colored SUVs were already parked at the curb. Min-Jae was standing by the gate, his black suit perfectly pressed, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a statue of a god from a forgotten era, implacable and lethal. 2 men in similar suits stood 10 paces behind him, their eyes scanning the surrounding trees and parked cars with predatory focus. Hana was inside the office, safe and eating a snack, protected by the security detail Min-Jae had apparently dispatched the moment the call ended. But Min-Jae wasn't looking at the school. He was looking at a man pinned against a brick wall 50 yards down the street. It was Kevin's younger cousin, a boy named Leo who had always done Kevin's dirty work. He was trembling, his face pale as a ghost, as one of Min-Ye's men held him by the scruff of his neck. A high-end camera with a long lens sat smashed on the sidewalk at his feet. I walked toward Min-Ye, my legs feeling like lead. "Is she okay? Did he touch her?" Min-Ye turned to me. The softness I had seen at the barbecue was gone, replaced by the silent architect, the man who dismantled empires. He reached out and gripped my shoulder, his thumb pressing firmly into the fabric of my sweater. "She is untouched, and she will stay that way." He walked toward the boy pinned against the wall. The air seemed to vibrate with the sheer force of Min-Ye's intent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even remove his rings this time. He simply stood in front of Leo, his shadow swallowing the younger man whole. "You were sent here to send a message," Min-Ye said, his voice a low, vibrating hum. "Now you will take one back." He leaned in, his face inches from Leo's. "Tell Kevin that every time he thinks of her name, I will take something from him. Tell him that prison walls are made of stone, but my reach is made of shadow. If another photo is taken, if another word is whispered to her, he won't make it to his trial. He will simply cease to be." Min-Ye reached out and grabbed the boy's hand, the one that had held the camera. He didn't break it, but I saw the boy's knees buckle from the sheer pressure. "The law is a process, boy. I am an end. Do not make me reach the end." He signaled to his men, and they let Leo go. The boy stumbled, nearly falling over his own feet, and ran toward a waiting car, as if the devil himself were at his heels. Min-Ye turned back to me, the ice in his eyes finally beginning to melt as he looked at my face. He reached out and tucked a stray hair behind my ear, his touch lingering. "I told you I would be your wall, Ji-Yeon," he said softly. "A wall doesn't just stand there, it pushes back." "They know where she is," I sobbed, the adrenaline finally giving way to terror. "They know her schedule, they know everything." "They know nothing," Min-Ye corrected. He looked at the SUVs, then back at me. "From this moment on, the world you knew is over. You will never walk alone again. You will never wonder who is behind you, because I am behind you. And behind me is a force that men like Kevin cannot even imagine." He took my hand, his rings cold and solid against my skin. As he led me toward the car to collect Hana, I realized that the underground my family feared wasn't just a place of crime. It was a place of absolute, terrifying loyalty. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the monster in the shadows, because the man holding my hand was the king of them. The morning of the preliminary hearing, the courthouse was a monolith of cold marble and indifferent bureaucracy. Usually, this was a place where I felt invisible, just another case number in a sea of domestic tragedies. But today, as I walked up the wide stone steps, the air felt different. I wasn't clutching a tattered folder of police reports alone. I was flanked by two men in dark suits, their presence creating a silent wake through the crowded hallway, and Min-Ye walked beside me, his hand a steady, warm weight at the small of my back. Inside the courtroom, the fluorescent lights hummed with a sterile, buzzing energy. I took my seat in the front row, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I could feel the eyes of the bailiffs and the court clerk lingering on Min-Ye. He didn't look like a typical victim's advocate. He sat with his legs crossed, his posture radiating a terrifyingly calm authority, his dark eyes fixed on the empty wooden dock where the defendant would soon appear. When the side door finally opened and Kevin was led in, shackled at the wrists and ankles, the courtroom went silent. He walked in with his usual bravado, his shoulders squared, his jaw set in that defiant, aggressive tilt I had spent years fearing. He looked toward his mother in the gallery, offering a smirk as if to say this was all just a temporary inconvenience. Then his gaze drifted toward me. The smirk didn't just fade, it vanished as if it had been struck from his face. Kevin's eyes traveled past me to the man sitting directly behind my shoulder. Min-Ye didn't move. He didn't scowl. He simply leaned forward slightly, the light catching the gold and onyx rings on his fingers as he rested his hands on the back of my chair. The change in Kevin was instantaneous. The man who had once strangled me in a public supermarket, who had sent threatening photos of our daughter, suddenly looked like a cornered animal. His face turned a sickly shade of gray, and I felt the bench vibrate as his knees began to knock against the wooden railing of the dock. He wasn't looking at the judge. He wasn't listening to the prosecutor read the list of charges: aggravated assault, stalking, multiple violations of a restraining order. He was staring at the dragon ink climbing Min-Ye's neck, a visual reminder of the man who had humbled him with a single grip. "Mr. Choi," the judge said, her voice sharp. "Do you understand the charges being brought against you?" Kevin didn't answer. His breathing had become shallow and ragged. He looked around the room as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. He saw Min-Ye's men standing by the back doors, their faces expressionless stone. He realized then that he wasn't just in a court of law, he was in a cage designed by the silent architect. "Mr. Choi," the judge repeated, leaning forward. Kevin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. "Yes," he whispered, his voice cracking. He looked back at Min-Ye, whose expression remained a mask of cold, predatory patience. It was a look that said, "The judge can only give you years. I can give you eternity." Throughout the testimony, whenever I felt my voice falter, I felt the slight pressure of Min-Ye's hand on the back of my chair. It was a silent anchor. For the first time, I wasn't a victim pleading for mercy from a system that usually forgot me the moment I left the building. I was the protected interest of a man who owned the very ground we stood on. When the prosecutor brought up the schoolyard photos, Kevin's lawyer tried to object, claiming lack of evidence. Min-Ye didn't blink. He just shifted his gaze to the lawyer, a brief, icy stare that made the older man stumble over his next sentence and eventually sit down, his objection forgotten. By the end of the hearing, the judge denied bail, citing Kevin as a high-risk threat to the community. As the bailiffs moved to lead Kevin away, he did something I never thought I'd see. He didn't look at me with rage. He didn't shout a final threat. He scrambled to get away from the dock, his shackles clanking frantically, his eyes wide with a desperate, naked fear. He was safer in a prison cell than he was in the same room as Min-Jae Lee, and he knew it. Min-Jae stood up as the room began to clear. He didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He simply turned to me and offered his hand. "He won't be coming back, Ji-Yeon," Min-Jae said, his voice a low, soothing hum that finally allowed the tension in my chest to break. "He looked so small," I whispered, looking at the door where Kevin had disappeared. "I've spent years thinking he was a giant, but today he looked like nothing." "Because he is nothing," Min-Jae replied, leading me toward the exit. "He was a shadow that only looked big because you were standing in the dark. Now the light is behind you." As we walked out of the courthouse, the reporters and the noise of the city felt miles away. I realized that while the judge had delivered a ruling, Min-Jae had delivered a verdict. Kevin Choi was no longer a threat, not because of the law, but because he had finally met the man who governed the shadows. The aftermath of the trial felt like waking up from a decade-long fever. The constant ringing in my ears, the sound of Kevin's voice, the phantom sensation of his hands, had finally gone silent. But as the adrenaline of the courtroom faded, a new, quieter anxiety began to set in. I was a dental receptionist living in a cramped apartment with a broken lock, trying to raise a daughter on a paycheck that barely covered the groceries, let alone the security I now knew we needed. A week after the sentencing, Min-Jae called. He didn't ask to meet at a restaurant or his estate. Instead, he gave me an address in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood known for its safety and its excellent schools. When the car dropped us off, Min-Jae was already there, leaning against the iron gate of a beautiful, modern townhouse. The brick was warm in the afternoon sun, and the windows were large and clear, reflecting the greenery of the park across the street. Looked up as Hana ran toward him, catching her in a hug before looking at me. "You've spent too many years living in a fortress, Ji-Yeon," he said, walking toward me. "It's time you lived in a home." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single silver key attached to a heavy matte black keychain. He held it out to me, his expression unreadable but his eyes searching mine. "I can't accept this, Min-Jae," I whispered, my heart hammering. "A house. This is too much. I can't pay you back for this." "You aren't paying me back," he said, his voice firm. "I didn't buy this for you to owe me. I bought it because Hana deserves to sleep in a room where she doesn't hear the neighbors fighting through the walls, and you deserve to walk through your front door without checking over your shoulder." He closed my hand over the key, his rings cold against my knuckles. "The title is in your name. The security system is linked directly to my personal detail. You are safe here. truly safe. As he led us inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. The kitchen was bright and airy, a far cry from the dim, narrow space I was used to. But it wasn't just the house. On the marble countertop sat a thick, professional-looking folder. I opened it to find an enrollment packet for the city's top dental hygiene program, along with a receipt for a full 4-year tuition. My breath caught in my throat. I had mentioned once during our barbecue dinner that I dreamed of moving beyond the front desk, but that the cost of the degree felt like a mountain I'd never climb. The program starts in the fall, Min-Jae said, standing by the window as he watched Hana explore the living room. I've arranged for a stipend to cover your expenses while you study. You won't have to work at the clinic anymore. Your only job now is to build a future that Kevin can't touch. I sank into one of the new chairs, the weight of his generosity feeling almost as heavy as the fear used to be. Why are you doing all of this? You've already given us our lives back. Min-Jae turned, the light from the large windows silhouetting his frame. Because for 5 years, I've watched people suffer because I couldn't be in 2 places at once. I have the means to change the trajectory of your life, Ji-Yeon, to see you go from surviving each day to actually thriving. That brings me more peace than any business deal ever could. He walked over and knelt in front of me, much like he had for Hana in the supermarket. For a man the world feared, he was remarkably comfortable at the level of a person in need. Survival is a habit, he said softly. It's a hard one to break. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop for the bill to come due. But there is no bill. This is the floor, Ji-Yeon. I am the floor. You can stop falling now. I looked at the key in my hand and then at the tuition papers. For the first time, I didn't see a debt. I saw a bridge. I saw a version of myself that wasn't defined by bruises or restraining orders. I saw a mother who could look her daughter in the eye and tell her that we were finally home. Thank you, I whispered, the tears finally coming not from pain but from the sheer, overwhelming relief of being seen. Min-Jae didn't say you're welcome. He just took my hand, his thumb tracing the back of my palm. Don't thank me, just live. That's all the payment I need. That night, for the first time in my adult life, I didn't push a chair against the door. I didn't listen for the sound of a key that shouldn't be there. I lay in a bed that felt like a cloud, listening to the silence of a life that was finally mine, knowing that the silent architect had built a world for me where I was finally allowed to breathe. The seasons had shifted, the biting chill of winter giving way to the soft, fragrant bloom of spring. I was halfway through my first semester of the dental hygiene program, and my life had taken on a rhythm I once thought was reserved only for other people. In our new townhouse, the morning sun didn't feel like a spotlight searching for a victim. It felt like a blessing. Hana was thriving, her laughter now a constant soundtrack in our home, her nightmares replaced by dreams of the park and Uncle Min. One golden Sunday afternoon, Min-Jae asked us to meet him at the park across from our home, the same place where we had shared our first real conversation after the world had stopped being terrifying. We sat on the same weathered wooden bench, watching Hana chase a golden retriever puppy across the grass. The park was full of families, ice cream carts, and the simple, beautiful noise of life. Min-Jae sat beside me, his presence as steady and solid as the earth beneath us. He had traded his usual sharp suit for a dark cashmere sweater, but the silver ring still glinted on his fingers, a reminder of the man who had stood between me and a monster. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb tracing the space where my pulse had once raced with fear. Now it beat with a quiet, certain strength. I've spent most of my life building things that can be taken away, he said, his voice a low, melodic hum that resonated in my chest. Warehouses, contracts, alliances. I thought that was what it meant to have a legacy, but standing here watching her, looking at you, I realized I was just building walls to keep the world out. I looked at him, seeing the silent architect in a new light. The tattoos on his neck were still there, a mark of the world he governed, but the ice in his eyes had long since melted into something profound and protective. The day I saw you in that supermarket, he continued, his gaze locking onto mine, something inside me that had been dead for 5 years started to breathe again. I told myself I was just doing a duty. I told myself it was about justice. But the truth is, Ji-Yeon, you and Hana didn't just need a protector. I needed a reason to be one. He reached into the pocket of his sweater and pulled out a small, velvet box. My breath hitched, not with the panic of the past, but with a soaring, overwhelming sense of the future. I'm not asking you to marry me today, he said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant band of platinum set with a single, radiant diamond. You are still healing. You are building your own career, your own identity, your own strength. I want you to have the time and space to become the woman you were always meant to be before the world tried to break you. He took the ring out, the light catching its facets. But I want you to know that my intentions are permanent. I am not a temporary shield, and I am not a passing shadow. I am the man who stays. He slid the ring onto my right hand. It was a promise ring, a vow of consistency, a declaration of intent. When you are ready, I will ask you properly. But until then, I want you to know that you and Hana are my family now, and I protect my family always. I looked down at the ring, then at the man who had chosen to rebuild my entire world from the ashes of my abuse. I looked at Hana, who was now running back toward us, her face flushed with joy, yelling, "Uncle Min, did you see me?" Min-Jae stood up, catching her in his arms and swinging her around until she shrieked with delight. He looked at me over her shoulder, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his handsome face. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what was around the corner. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop or for the piece to shatter. I had been grabbed by the throat by a man who wanted to destroy my spirit, but I had been saved by a man who chose to cherish it. The scars on my neck had faded, and the piece of paper that had failed me was a distant memory. In its place was something much stronger, a promise made in the light, backed by a man who ruled the shadows. As we walked back toward our home together, the three of us silhouetted against the setting sun, I finally understood that real love doesn't look like control. It looks like the freedom to finally stop running. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were a family. And for the first time, the future didn't look like a threat. It looked like home.